So I think we're ready to go. My goodness, we have a nice full house. I'm Myrna Huffman. I'm Director of Information Systems at the Chancellor's Office. I consider that a privilege. I work with the best team you could ever have as a person who has a group of folks. We do our best to come out with data elements that can make your life easier and produce the kind of data that we need to answer policy questions. So we were a part of a team that went to work this past year to come up with this new data set. I think over the course of this morning, this information that you see on the first screen that I have, you've heard a million times. Probably this is what, the fifth presentation today that said, gee, we have SB 1456 and we have this thing that came out and we have a work group that got together and we talked about data elements and we talked about allocation. This session is to talk about data elements. Allocations is a policy, and we IT folks can put data in a pipe and shoot that data anywhere you want it to land. But we're not the policy people. We can implement code that will make the policy work, but we don't write the policy to make the code. So the policy questions, I hope that there are a few that if they're not too complicated, we can answer the questions. Plus Deborah's here, Sheldon, from the previous session, so she can handle a few of those too. So that is called our cop-out for the day. Just a couple of things. I know Linda went through this, but if you're IT, it's important to know these particular timelines. The matriculation file that currently exists is not going away for your reporting in 1314. You still have to send in that SM file because we're going to do funding for the next year, the 14-15 year, from that SM data that comes in. We don't use it in particular, but we use everything about the student. So keep that coming in one more year. You can start sending in the SS this year if you happen to have the data elements ready. I think there are some of you, like the DataTel and the Banner groups, that are already working towards, and PeopleSoft too, to getting those data elements ready. If you have them ready and want to send those in as an experiment this year, that's fine. The edits are still going to be applied though. If you send an SS data file, the edits that we have for the data elements are not going to be not used. Now you can pull that file at some point if it's too many and say, I don't want to send it in because it's not obligatory, it's an option. But come next summer, the summer of 2014, you got to have the SS file in. That data for 14-15 will be used when we do the 15-16 allocation. So you got kind of a year to play it out. We've done, this is a normal progression for us when we do a new data set. I think some of you might remember we did special populations a couple of years ago. The first year it was by choice. The second year it was by demand. A lot of folks used that spring in particular to get in a pretend one to see how they needed to fix the one that really needed to come in. I think it's a good practice. Gives you some idea of where you're at and what kind of edits you're going to face as the submission time goes on. Summer usually isn't much of a battle, but fall is. So when you're getting that fall 14 data in for the first time and you've never done a practice set, it could be a difficult task for you to pull off. So if you can any way, shape, or form get some spring 14 data in before we mandatory make it next fall and next summer, I think that'd be great. I'm not going to read every word that's on every screen because our purpose here, if you receive the data set itself, all the things that we're talking about today are actually in that data set. There are just a few highlights that I wanted to make known. The domain of this has not changed at all from the domain we used for SM. This is exactly the same domain that we had for the SM, the matriculation. It hasn't changed an iota. The data elements themselves are different enough that we felt it was a good time to make a break and have a new data set. But that domain is the same. If you have a weekly or a daily census class, you come in. If you've had an hour of PAWSAT, you come in. If you've made a mark on your transcript in some fashion, you send that data in. Or if you've done what we call pre-enrollment services, you send that data in. And you're supposed to send it in the term that the student received the service that you're reporting. So if you did pre-enrollment in the spring, which a lot of you do for the high school feeders that you actually go out and do assessment and maybe even orientation, possibly counseling, that can come in during the term that you did it. So that's not a different domain. That's the same domain we've been using since early 90s. I always like to make sure that we look at how the data lives in our world, and I see a lot of smiles because those of you that come to our presentations as regular IT folks see this Star Trek / poodle diagram all the time. But I think what it does, in knowing today that I had a really broad mixture of folks here, we've got IT folks, we've got student service folks, we have people who are not familiar at all with the data that we collect. It's important that you see how the data lives together. You can touch any oval that you see on that screen and get to any other oval on that screen. No matter where you decide to come into that data set, it allows you to see the data in all the other circles. This is a true relational database, and it truly gives you access into all the information you could ever want to know about a student. So when you send in your new student success data set, I'll be able to look at all other kinds of things about those students, not just their matriculation data elements, but everything about them. Did they get a degree? Did they get a certificate? Did they get financial aid? Did they get any other special services that we offer, like ELPS or TelWorks, or were they a special population? Were they in Mesa? Were they in Puente? Did they have part-time instructors or full-time instructors? All that kind of information becomes available just by getting your circle. When you get your little oval or your little circle, you've opened up into the whole data set that is the Chancellor's Office MIS database. And we've been collecting data since the summer of 1992. We have the largest post-secondary student database in the United States. We have to buy machines because it's too big. We have several terabyte machines that we store it on, and they keep yelling at me that we're running out of space. But this database, people from all over the United States ask us for information because no one has individual student records like we have with so much information about the students. And the new student success data set will be a part of that. And as you see progress with your students, the nation as a whole is going to want to see that progress as well. Okay, quick reminder of how data comes in. We have summer, fall, winter, and spring. That's what we call an academic year for data reporting purposes. When you send in your data, those are the time frames in which you'll send it in. A term to us is a quarter or a semester, depends upon your college. We have a few quarter colleges left, but mostly semesters. You don't have to have a winter intersession, but you might have one. If you do, you'll send that data in for the winter intersession. For an SS data element, the other file that will get your data kicked out quicker than anything is if you don't send what we call a student basic record. And a student basic record is some basic information about the student, their birth date, their gender, their ethnicity, anything, their high school they graduated from, bits of information that tells us something about the student. And then you're allowed to send in the SS data element set. Remember that picture I just showed you that had all those little ovals? When you send your data in, all those little ovals come in at the same time with the exception of just a couple. So when you ask your IT to resubmit data, they have to send that whole complement of data, not just that one little piece that you have attachment to, but the entire data set. So that's why it's so important to review data the minute that it hits the office so that you can tell IT within a reasonable time frame to resubmit. The longer you wait, the longer it will take them to resubmit. If you wait 6 months, it could take them 2 to do the resubmittal. Because times change, data changes. They now have to re-extract the data and see what they can do to make it come out. Because that sends the whole shebang, not just one circle, not just one oval. The new success data element set has 11 elements. Those are the lovelies right there in front of you. I think most of you get a look-see at them when we put them out in July, last part of July. We did a webinar in August for IT folks, just mentioning to them, and it was strictly an IT kind of, we do it every August, say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what's new. I told them at that webinar that come October, once we had the completion of the Student Success Summit, that we would have another webinar and bring up anything that might have been brought forth during the summit if it has any bearing on tweaks to the actual data elements. But for general purposes, those data elements are set. There might be a clarification in the language or whatever, but the data elements are what they are. So we're going to kind of, not good with this microphone. At home, I grew up in a large family, and yelling was the preferred method. We still use it in our office. Why go over and talk to their cube if you can yell at them over 5 cubes? But it works. It's a form of communication. If you're new to our data element dictionary, and I see a lot of faces that are probably not IT folks, it really has 3 components to it. When we talk about the definition of the data element, and then the codes that can go with that data element, and any notes, which are special things we want you to remember about the element, those are all things about that particular student. This is how you're going to code the student. These are the values that you can use. These are some things you should keep in mind. Then we have an area that are the rejections. We do rejection by the field. Like if you were supposed to put a 1 or a 2 and you put a 5, it's out of there. We do an integrity check, which is between 2 fields. If they don't match what they should be, I'll show you a couple of integrities when I go through the data elements. We reject them. Then we do the thing that I think the long-standing IT folks, and I can see their faces, hate the most, and that would be our quality check. A quality check means you know how to put a 1 or a 2 in. You know how to make the fields have the right relationship, but the quality is suspect. All your students have no birth date, or all your students are not continuing, or all your students are whatever. You're going to see a few quality checks as we talk today. Those are the ones that are harder for the college to resolve because they usually require going back and looking at the data to see how they can make this thing be fixed. We help with that. If during the course of this next year and the year after that, you get quality checks, the first thing you do is contact the CCMIS edit, which you'll see on the bottom of the dictionaries, and say, I have a problem. We set up a CC confer and we have a talk about it. We bring in appropriate student services or financial aid or whatever the case may be, and we all talk about it together to see if we can come up with a resolution. The resolution might be making your percentage be a little different, or it might be showing you that indeed you do know the answer to this, you just need to extract your data a little differently. So don't worry about the type of error. Contact us and let us help you with what's going on, especially with a new one. The other piece that you need to monitor in a data element dictionary is what we call the change history. That's where we put in any changes that we might have made and when we made them. So you can see the new elements that you're getting. The first thing you're going to see in there is only one thing, and that's implemented for next summer. On our older data elements, you'll see what's happened over time. We've made a little change, we've made a little clarification, we added another code, whatever it is we did to that particular data element. So that's the structure of the DED. Because one of the first things you want to do is know what you're looking at. Because here's the fact of the matter, and this is what I tell every group we talk to. It doesn't matter whether it's student services folks or it's CalWorks folks or who it is. IT doesn't own this data. We know how to collect it. We know how to put it in the way that the Chancellor's office wants it if you're at the college, and we know how to slam it down there so they get it. But we don't own it. The people who own it are the ones who have to review it. So if you're the CalWorks coordinator, you review it. If you're the student services person, you'll review it. It's not going to be reviewed by the IT folks. Their review is, it passed the edits and it landed at the Chancellor's office, check mark, I'm done. What happens, it depends on this question is basic about the consequences of rejections. Let me talk about it in general, whether you're talking about the student services data set or whether you're talking about any data set. Our percent of error allowable is 0.001%, which means if you're a large college, you might get 10 records that can reject, and if you're a small college, you get zip. We do have a couple of files where the percent of error is zip. If you can't submit a college calendar, which is 365 records without an error, it's going to dump out. Sorry. There's no tolerance. We have a no tolerance zone. But over the years, during early implementation back in the early 90s, the error limits were relatively high. The goal in 1992 was to get data into the office. This is now 2013. The goal is quality data. We've long left the goal of get it into the office. We've now reached the stage of this has to have some worth. It has to accurately represent the activity at your college/district. No more, gee, if you're kind of close, we're going to let it in. So what happens on errors, if you have that, I don't just, some of them are just the file itself is rejected. But on a quality error, nothing. Remember all those lovely circles? If you get a quality error, none of the circles get loaded. Not even one circle. No circles get loaded. We have to have a conversation. We did that deliberately. Usually a quality error means there's something significantly funky with this data. We need to have a talk about it. If we let it in, it will never change. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, I'm going to resubmit, I'm going to resubmit. Resubmit never happens because resubmit's a lot of work. So what we've done is just said, sorry, this doesn't get loaded. Then we'll have a conversation about it. Interestingly enough, the quality edits are now in their third year, I think. Keith will certainly correct me if that's not right. The thing that's interesting about it, we have 72 districts. Data comes into our office by district. There are some districts that have never been trapped by a quality error. Not ever. They've all had their data in a state where they've never been caught by that. The quality errors, and I hate to say this, are usually the same districts term after term, academic year after academic year. If you don't want to get caught in that pattern, we're more than happy to help, but at some point there's the thing about one has to help themselves. Usually the error that caused it in the first place is the same one over and over again, and the solution is the same solution over and over again. The quality is going to stop you dead cold. If you have no data in, how much funding is going to occur? Zip. You got to have the data in to be included in any funding formula. I don't care whether it's SS data elements or it's any other categorical data element. You got to have the data in to be on the playing field itself. So the very first thing, and that's why it's important to try to see if you can get some data in for the spring. Don't have next fall of 14 be your first attempt. Then it just, you sweat and bullets by the time it has to come in, and then spring comes along, and then you got to have them in because it's the first Monday in August. Then we get the calls on them the Saturday before the first Monday, and the tears are flowing, and we're going, sorry. You can submit 24/7. Any day of the week, any time of the day, there's no restrictions. It loads when it comes in. One of the things that we'll do, that we do for other categoricals now, if you submit CalWorks data and you're the CalWorks coordinator, from the alias list, which is our business list at the Chancellor's office, that CalWorks coordinator gets an email that says, guess what? We just received your summer 2013 data. Here's where you can go to review it. What will be the case, and it needs an alias list that's actually used at the Chancellor's office, is an SS1. So that when that data comes in, we send it to that alias list and say, guess what? We just got your SS data. Go out and take a look at it and see what you think. Because your IT folks aren't going to be able to tell you if it's right. They can tell you that it passed edits and that it got loaded, but they can't tell you that it has worth. The worth comes from the folks who own the data. And I can't emphasize that enough. I know they want IT to own it, but we'd have to know everything about everything. And we're pretty good, but we're not that good. We're not that good. I did work with a gentleman one time who was a DBA, and he signed all his emails with G.0.D. And he said, I'm not God, I'm the giver of data. I said, okay, but it looks like God. Okay, the goal data element is basically the same one that we had previously. You need to update it if the student makes a change. If they don't, you report what was before, but remember this bottom piece. And this is the piece I want you to remember. If, out of all the credit, non-special admit students, 25% of your students say they have not decided on a goal, I'm going to bump out your submission for all your records. That's a high percentage. That means you've given them orientation and counseling perhaps and assessment, and they still don't know what they want to do as a goal. Not as a course of study here, but as a goal. Then we'll talk. That's a little tight. And it's credit, and it's non-special admit. We don't expect the non-credit folks. We're not going to include them. We're not going to include the special admits. I mean, we get the data in. Don't take that as meaning you don't submit it. You submit it, but for this edit, we'll only look at credit students and determine that what % of them are not choosing a goal. Here's the thing. Well, let's see if I can go back home. Oh, I can't read this without glasses. Sorry. Oh, we'll go downstairs, so that'll work. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time. I had glanced at my watch, and I have 30 minutes. I don't want you to keep, you guys have had an extremely long day. And we're okay? Okay. The course of study is a pet important piece to me. And the reason that it is because this data element is not just important for student services, but it's important for so many other things that we do, like gainful employment, like IPEDS, like CSAC's SB 70. The thing that they want to know about a student isn't the discipline that they might want to get a major in, but the actual program that they've decided to pursue. And by program, I'm not talking about discipline, I'm talking about program. If you have 5 automobile programs, they're all maybe in the same discipline, but I want to know the actual program that that student wants to pursue. That has a 5-character, what we call program control number. You can get it from the course inventory. The course program, the curriculum inventory on the Chancellor's Office website has all the program control numbers. That is way more valuable to us than the top code of a major they may have an interest in. If that's all you have, that's fine. But if you know that program control number, that's gold. Because that gives us answers not to just student success things, but to all kinds of other things that we use your data for. She's going to grab a microphone. It's for the recording, they can't hear it if she doesn't do the microphone. Oh, I hope it's long. Yeah, it looks like you got extension. When I put a little star, I'm not good with stars. That means, I mean that one. I mean that one.
Well, I could tell that you did, and that's where I have the question. If we have students who are interested in transferring in a discipline in which we do not have a degree, how do we accurately indicate to you the specific program in which they intend to obtain a degree or certificate?
If they get their degree or certificate, is it going to be in something like liberal arts?
They are probably going to transfer without a degree or certificate. That's the problem.
Okay, then you'll have to put in the only thing you have, which is the major. The problem, usually with those folks, to be honest with you, the GE is probably not going to be interested in them particularly. But when I send in the gainful employment data to the feds, I have to actually give them the name of the program. And they match it up with IPEDS against what you told in financial aid, and the whole thing becomes this mess, and a lot of letters come to you from the feds. I mean, basically, that's the bottom line of this whole thing. I try not to put too many stars in things. Like, people will say they did something, and even with my own kids, I used to say, I'm fresh out of stars. Because not everything is star-worthy, but some things are. This is an important piece. If you have the information, it would be like super good if you could do it. Sure.
So one of our questions at our college is if 45% of our students or 35% are undeclared and we submit our data, it will be rejected?
Yes, until we have a conversation. Now the conversation may result in a changing of your percentage, not the percentage for the state of California, the percentage for your college for that term. If we realize, if you can show to us that that's just the way it is.
So hypothetically,
right.
We have, let's just say 50% of our students are currently undeclared. So when next year when we have to start submitting this, we just get rid of an undeclared option. And students can no longer declare undeclared.
I don't think you want to do that. I don't think that's a solution. That's like sort of like cutting off your nose to spite your face solution. I don't think that's a solution. One of the things that we found, and I'll share this with you because this has come up like, I don't know, 500 times a term. But one of the things we've discovered is frequently we'll get a piece of data in, like let's say the spring data. and they'll say, whether it's this data element or any other, we don't know what that element is, so we have to put we don't know. Yet we'll look back in the fall of the same academic year and see that student, and it has a value in there for that. So we always say to them, well, what happened between the race that you knew in the fall and the one you don't know in the spring? Did you collect a different one? Well, no, it'd be the same one. Then why are you reporting it as unknown if you know it? A lot of times that can be a part of the issue that happens, and that's one of the things we help you with. We usually go back with every student that's been rejected and show you a history of what we've seen reported for that data element to see if perhaps it's a collection issue with the software that you're using as opposed to a true, I don't know what I want to do issue. So even though it sounds a little onerous to start with, like, oh my goodness, they're going to reject everything I have, I will not lie to you, this first year will be not particularly pleasant. Anytime you introduce a new data set, this is how it goes. The first year is always a little rocky as everybody kind of tries to figure out what they're doing and how they're going to do it. But we all live, nobody dies, and we get through it. And the worst thing you can do is pretend like it didn't happen. That's like so not the solution to this problem. There are many times that if you put a paper sack over your head, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The problem will take care of itself. This is not one of those. We have people who think if they just submit it 5 more times the same way, it'll be fine. It's not going to get any better until we have a conversation. This is not a paper sack issue. This is, gee, I'm going to have to send an email and we're going to have a conversation. But that's okay. I mean, that's our normal working day. That's not an imposition. That's just how it is. And a lot of the faces that I see in the crowd today, we've had these conversations with you over the years. Different terms for different data items for different quality checks. But that's the way it goes with the new data set. The SG, the new Special POPs, has a few eyebrows going up and down as they try to weather how to get that data in. And this will be the same way, but I honestly believe that in a couple of years you'll forget that this was even a problem and life will go down the path. It'll be okay. But I did not want to not put the percentages in because that's really the goal here. You guys can all read. The data elements are on the web. You don't need to read the data element, but you need me to tell you the ones that I get excited about. The student course of study, there was a lot of talk at lunchtime and other points of time during the day about the 15-unit, 22-quarter unit thing. This is not going to be implemented off the get-go. When we open in 14-15, this will not be a data check that we have initially, but it will happen. It may happen in 15-16, but it's not going to happen for that first term. This is a pretty intense one. And it's also something you have to do at the college in order to make yourself able to have that be the case, because you've got to have touched a lot of students in order to make it happen. So this won't be implemented immediately, but this will be a data element that will have this edit ultimately. Whether it's 14-15 or the following year, we'll see. But I don't, in my mind, don't see it for 14-15 at all. If at all, 15-16, and maybe even one more year after that. Because it takes a while, not just for you to get used to collecting them, but for you to perform all the duties associated with this new data set. There's a lot of responsibility to the Student Services Group for this data set. There's a lot of stuff in here. The exempt statuses that we're going to talk about are the same ones that we had in the old data set, but there's one huge difference. You only report it if they're exempt and you never change it. You just keep the same value unless the student comes in and for some reason isn't exempt anymore. Usually when you make an exempt status for orientation or assessment or counseling, it doesn't change over time. But it could. I'm just saying usually. That doesn't mean that if you report it, you can never change what you put in the first time. There are exceptions. Occasionally, the exempt statuses could change, and you would report a different value in there than you did initially. But normally, it's just the same push out over and over again. So the important thing to remember as far as assessment, orientation, and counseling go is this is the same kind of information. Sure.
So what would qualify as an exception to the exempt status when that would change?
Sometimes the things that we've been told, and I can't speak because I'm not a student services person, but the tales that I hear are related to the students been out of the system for quite some time. They were there maybe a term or two several years ago, and now they've come back maybe because of circumstance in their life, and now you do want to have them go through the processes. You don't want to exempt them. But it's not a normal happenstance.
Okay, so they come in, they file an application, they have a degree, so they're exempt in all the categories.
Right.
So are you saying that if they choose to go through the matriculation process, we could change them from exempt to fully matriculated?
That's something that you guys would have to make a decision on. We don't make.
Okay, so
I
that's
don't make
an
that
internal
decision.
policy that we can make.
And that's something you really need to throw back at policy people. But as far as it's a rare instance, I see it occasionally, but I usually see it when it's a returning student who has been gone for quite some time. And if they've been out of the workplace or in the academic place for a long time, sometimes you need to reassess it and do other things. And Debbie's got something to add to that, I think.
I was going to say, just because a student is exempt, it doesn't prevent them from, if they want to be served, they're allowed to be served. And so if you serve them, then you would report that they've been served.
Exactly. That's a different data element. This one is just about you're exempt. That's all it's about. And it does it for the same three. It does it for orientation, it does it for assessment, it does it for counseling and ed plan. Then you get down to, and I did this deliberately because it cracks me up, because IT is a little weird sometimes. This is simply yes or no, only you put A or N. But
I just have a question about the last data element, Myrna, and it's kind of a policy question. Maybe Deborah Sheldon knows. In the past, a student could refuse matriculation services, and we reported it in that exempt way. It sounds like from everything I've looked at and read, you may no longer refuse matriculation services. Is that true?
It isn't a refusal, it's an exemption. Okay, we're going to let Deborah speak to that.
If we're talking, if a student meets the criteria for exempt, you report them as exempt. But if they don't meet the criteria, as Linda was explaining earlier, should I stand up?
Yeah.
As Linda was explaining earlier this morning, colleges now have the legal authority to require students to go through matriculation services. And if they don't, to retain their enrollment priority. So while we don't have the authority to not admit them to the college, you do have the authority to withhold enrollment. Or enrollment priority, yes. Right. Yeah, which could, depending on what college you have and what kind of demand you're facing, that could be.
Right.
Does that answer the question?
So I'm going to cut. Right.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. But if they refuse services, then we can deny them enrollment priority.
Right. Because the old data elements for exemptions for orientation assessment and, well, they call it ed plan now, but it used to be just counseling, used to have directed, exempt, refused. And we've removed they've refused. It's just, are they exempted or are they directed? Then, okay, sure.
If the only choice is exempt or if the only choice is exempted or received, if they're refused, then they're going to get in your 25% rejection group?
You can't pick refused.
Well, I know, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, you have to pick one or the other. They're either directed to do it or they're exempted from it. That you don't. There's no Mr. in between.
But they've chosen not to. So what do we say? They're not really exempt.
They're still directed or exempt. You have to pick one down. If they choose not to go and you'd never report that they received the service, that was their decision to do that. You'll not get a tick mark for funding. Of course, you didn't do it, so the tick mark is irrelevant. On orientation, it's just, did you do it or did you not do it? that the thing that changes from the previous data set is you put it in every term. So if that student got orientation in the fall but not in the spring, you would not report that they got it in the spring. You would put a no. You'd put a yes in the fall if that's when you gave them orientation. The old data set used to have you carry certain things with them, not this one. Did it happen during the term that you report the data? The other piece, and I think Linda spoke to it a little bit this morning, was about if you're getting 320 information or monies for this, you can't double dip. Not our rule, just I'm the messenger. I'll put the, and there's no way that I can know whether you collected 320 for that, because guess what? You send a big fat number up here and I can't break it down by student. 320 is reported in aggregate, not by individuals.
We have another question?
Sure.
So it's a question about orientations that might be provided by certain other programs. So for example, a MESA program orientation or a Puente program orientation. Are those countable and therefore what you would put in SS06?
Right, and those are special POPs now. Well, Debbie's going to answer. I'd say yes.
And before she answers
I'm not in control.
Before she answers that, there's a lot of little side conversations going on out there, and just being at the front of the room, it's really hard to hear what's going on because there's a lot of talking. So if you could, not do that, that'd be great.
We had several conversations about these types of situations on the work group, and there's other purposes for this data besides just funding, although I know everyone wants the funding. So if you've provided a service, report it, because we want you to report. How we slice and dice the actual, when we actually start running the funding formula, which we still have to develop the programming and figure out how we're going to check for whether a student is in DSPS and whether they got the service through DSPS and they're getting paid out of that, as opposed to that we still have to develop. But basically, first and foremost, if the student, if you provide the service to the student, report it. And how it gets worked out with the funding, we'll be working on that in this coming year.
Right. That's a different consideration.
Another question.
We got one more? Okay. It's like 5,000 degrees in here or not? Oh, good. I thought maybe I was having a moment.
It's in the follow-up data element. In the follow-up data element, it says if you have a second orientation, that's the follow-up data element. So you would report a second or tertiary orientation in that follow-up component.
In the SS11.
Okay.
SS11.
We have another question?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the problem I have with this issue, because is that we used to do orientation in courses, and we would count that we were able to report that a student got orientation. That was required for them to get priority registration.
Right.
Okay, so I know, so I'm collecting that data. So I've got to catch-22 here, and I want the school to have credit to say, they'll look at me and say, you didn't orient those students. Well, yeah, I did. So how is this, I mean, if I report this and it's in a class, what are we going to do here? Because you got us caught between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. Tweet coming your way. This has been discussed amongst ourselves. Okay, I'm going to keep trucking because I just want to make sure I hit the highlights. I'm going to do a webinar in October that will readdress this, and this time I'll push it out not just to IT folks, but to the research and planning, to the CSSOs, to anybody else that has an interest in it. And we'll recap, I guess, what went on today and any changes we might have to make to the data elements that we have. The assessment services data element changed considerably. It was some of these elements that had such profound change in them that led us to believe that the best way to handle the data set was to make a new data set and not try to retool the old matriculation data elements. Because now you can pick a variety of things that you used for placement and put them in at the same time for that student. Again, it's one of those deals is if you did it that term, report it that term. If you didn't do it that term, don't report it that term. And you can report that you did placement by every single one of those first students, if indeed that is what you did. So it gives you a little bit more variety in what you can report as far as how you did the assessment. It wasn't very robust before. It also gives us some research information that we may be able to use as the months and years go by to see if perhaps there's any relationship to this element being blown out a little bit to give us more data. Because like was just said, this is not just a data set for funded student service. This is about using it for a lot of other things as well.
So if we have students that take English and math classes and they receive skill levels based on those English and math classes, would that be considered an alternative measure to submit for assessment? Or not? I just want a definition of alternative measures.
That's Deb.
When you're saying that, are you referring to, like, for example, the Long Beach model where you're using a transcript, where you're making a placement based on transcript evaluation, or at your institution? Would they have already taken an assessment or not?
Would not have. Say they would start at the bottom without taking an assessment on basic skills. They finish their basic skills. They move up into the. I'm sorry. They take their basic skills classes. They move up to the next level. We give them a higher level skill level based on completion of that class. Is that considered an alternative measure of assessment because they've completed a class? I'm just trying to figure out the definition of how we could use that or not use that. So you would say no, probably.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, but I am not the assessment specialist in our office. She's actually our former assessment specialist is sitting here. But I'll have to get back to you on that, to be honest.
Okay. That's okay. We can make a list of all this stuff. That's not a problem.
We have another question.
We have one more question before we move on to the next one. Actually, two, because I think you've had your hand up for a while, right?
John, always wants something.
I told Linda not to bring you.
This is a follow-up on the same thing. In our district, we have common course numbering across the district. We also are in an area with several other colleges very, very close to us in the Sacramento area right here. Sarah, Yuba has Woodland, etc. So if a student comes in and they don't have a degree yet, so they're not exempt, but they've taken intermediate algebra and transfer level English at another college, now they have to go through our assessment tests anyway because we can't use that? Is that what you said? Or okay, so what would that count under? It's not placement results from another college or university, it's the course they took there.
Those are your four choices.
Okay. We have one more question. One more question, John.
One more.
I'm going back to the orientation question.
Sure.
You stated it's by term that we report orientation.
If it happened that term, you'll say it happened. If it didn't, you'll say it did not happen.
Okay, so
that's different from the old one.
Right. So we shouldn't continue to roll over and report that. Now, is that because it's funding related? Because in the past session we had, I thought I heard that we could continue to report it. It would just be excluded from the funding part of it. And the reason I ask is from a functional perspective of how we're going to collect this data.
The data element itself says only report it if you perform that service during that term.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, we argued back and forth because I think what they thought is we couldn't figure out if you got it before, but we said it's fine. We went on. Okay, I don't have the person that does this. Okay. So the student counseling and advisement, there's a big change that happened here. We used to have a data element that did counseling, advisement, ed plan all in one big happy family. And now we have two data elements, one that does counseling and advisement, and then another one that's strictly about educational plans. This one is about the counseling and advisement piece. And it says here, and this is kind of important, that counseling or advising services provided through another categorical program should be included for purposes of reporting. We've always said that in the old data element as well. So if you do DSPS or EOPS or whatever, go ahead and put that in there. Now when it comes to allocation time, they may ask us to pull those students out, but that's a different question from should you report it. Yes, you should report it if you perform the service of counseling or advisement. And you only report it if it happened that term. Not some other term, but that term. And you don't report the ed plan here. In the old days, SM, we reported it here, not here in the new one. The new one has its own data element. Yeah, we can.
You meet me halfway.
We just, yeah, the mic doesn't carry out to the CC confer if we don't use the mic.
Is there a limitation on the number of times a student can receive this per college or per their years?
You can report it each semester, but this isn't a times data element. It's just a tick mark that says this student received this particular service. Not how many times did they receive it. They could have had it 500 times that term, but you put the mark in that says this term they got it. Now you might put the mark in again in another term, but it's just a tick mark to say it happened, not how many times it happened. This is important because what is counseling and advisement has been around and around and around. This is the definition that we were asked to put into the data element. It says, do not include counseling or advising that occurs in a class for which apportionment is generated. This takes us right back to the other data element, which also said, do not include if this generated apportionment. So my guess is whatever your issue was with that one is also your issue with this one. So the issue hasn't changed, but the data element has changed. So we'll have to, these are, I can see Deborah's wheels going around right now. Well, it'll work itself out. This is called new data element time. There is a definition that was supplied to us by the Student Services workforce about what counseling and advisement can should be included in it. That little piece is there. It says, though, that you can have this take place during individual appointments or group advising or counseling. So it can happen either way. It doesn't say anything about class advising or counseling, just group. That could be a web class, an online class. It could be an auditorium with a whole bunch of people in it. It could be whatever.
Audrey has a question.
Just because I know some of us get creative. Peer advising performed by students is probably not to be in here, correct? But I do know that over time we have peer mentoring, peer advising, some call it peer counseling. So because of now the first time we're tied to the dollar sign, I think clarification is critical in this one.
I agree. At Sierra, I used to be a part of a mentor program for women who are re-entering the workforce. And we would partner up with them because that was like a trauma for some ladies to come back into the workforce after many years of not being in it. But I would not call myself a counselor. We had lunch together or took a walk together and talked about what to do with education as a whole. But I don't think I would have that reported in this particular data element. But that's something that needs to be defined by the folks who do student services.
Got that, Deborah?
She's writing. She's got them all. I've watched. She's writing them all down, folks. She's writing them all down. Student ed plan. Oh my goodness, this hasn't even implemented, and my inbox is like swelled. What is comprehensive? What is abbreviated? Some attempt has been made through the definitions in the data dictionary to distinguish between the two. And the complaint I get, well, one says 1 or 2 terms, and then you start the comprehensive one, you say 2 terms. How can they both be 2 terms? The key to the second one, though, is you're making a plan that is what's required of them to achieve their declared course of study, which is different from the abbreviated, which may not go into every little thing they need to take in order to achieve that goal, but maybe to get started on it. I think that's the kicker between the two. But that's something for student services to yay or nay on. But it appears to me that that's the key between the two definitions is that little piece that was tacked on there at the end. There is one element, remember we talked about integrity where we said two data elements kind of work together? If you say that you've given this student a comprehensive ed plan, you cannot tell me that they don't have a course of study. Not buying it. Otherwise, that was the worst comprehensive ed plan ever.
Hey, we have a question.
You got to have a course of study coming out of that.
Myrna, for the DSPS program for the SEC. So we're planning to use that as their abbreviated ed plan, but they do that every single semester. They're required to do an SEC every semester. Do we count it?
You should report it if you did it. It doesn't mean that it will necessarily count towards more dollars for you, but you may put some of those in SS11, you know, the other, which is growing your ed plan, basically. But if you did a service, report it. Don't not report it. Let the Chancellor's Office group that's going to figure out the formula decide whether you should get dollars and cents for that. Don't make your own judgment and cut your throat for no good reason. Send in what you did. Let's not send in what we didn't do, but do send in what we did.
Okay,
and then let it work from this side of the business. Mark, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I guess my question is, it's kind of nice to use the data elements to kind of keep track of what we actually do on the campus for our own purposes.
Yep.
But it sounds like because you're having us turn over the data on some of these things every single term, we actually lose track if we don't keep a longitudinal record that it happened in fall of 2012, but now in fall of 2013, the record about, you know, any of those elements is now saying no, 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 because we didn't do it this term.
But you have longitudinal data because you have to.
Right. But it is kind of
It's more work. It's more work from a data research perspective than if you keep rolling over what you did, but that's not how the data elements have been set up. But you can do it. I mean, this is minor data work as far as 15 minutes. All righty. She's doing good.
Keeping you on track.
I know. I'm the worst. Progress probation. Obviously, there's two kinds. Now, this is not an element that existed before. We had some things called follow-up and other stuff in which we collected a lot of stuff that we weren't even sure what it was. So we've made it now a little more descriptive. We're going to collect things about whether or not you received some sort of support if you were on progress probation or dismissal. Then you can send the piece in to us and we know it. You can't do tutoring, you can't do student success courses, and you can't say, I sent out an email to you, but I didn't do anything for you. The very act of sending the email does not count as a service. You have to provide something other than the email that landed in their local campus email box. You have to do something beyond the student showed up for something, some event that you helped them with. There will ultimately be a data check. How many are familiar with SB 22, the one that caught a lot of you this last go around? SB 22 is what you report after the term is over about the academic standing of the student. You'll tell us things like they are in good academic standing, or they're on probation, or they're facing dismissal, or they were dismissed, or whatever. It comes in at the end of the term, and it tells us where the student stands at the end of the term. If you came here and said you provided dismissal services, yet you reported to me that they were in good academic standing, we might have a question about that. So we'll see if that, I haven't implemented that for the 14-15. I'm not 100% sure that the link is there. I just want to think this through a little bit before I throw that edit in. But don't be surprised if it becomes one. We got a gentleman way in the back. She'll meet you halfway. I think it's because she's tethered here a little bit.
Whatever happened to wireless mics?
I don't know. Usually they have wireless mics. I'm surprised. Could be because of the CC concession.
So with SB 22 and the probation dismissal, if I'm not mistaken, we're not required to update the student academic standing during the summer term. But I believe you're still collecting information for the summer term. So at Butte, we didn't even run that process that awards a status. It's just, it's null.
It's primary terms.
Okay.
Fall and spring.
So we're looking at fall and spring, but
Yeah.
there's still a process to
Yeah.
report for summer, and so summer is basically null, but we're reporting good because I don't think there's an option for null. So it's switching
No,
back
there
and
isn't
forth
an option.
between.
Well, there's an uncollected or doesn't need it.
Yeah,
There's
so
a
it's
couple
switching
of
back and
choices.
forth between like P1, P2, and then all of a sudden it's
Right.
good, and then all of a sudden it's dismissed. So that might be something we want to look
Yeah,
at.
we could take a look at maybe not getting it at all. This, again, is one of those things where you report it every term. If it happened that term, you report it that term. If it didn't happen that term, you put in that you didn't do that service. The last one is the new catch-all. The old catch-all was follow-up services, and the new catch-all is other services. Similar to follow-up, but not quite the same. But the best thing about the SS11 is more defining. The follow-up was just kind of like, here's some things that might be in there. This one is very specific. It said, did you give another kind of orientation? Did you give another kind of assessment? Did you do some follow-up on the ed plans? Did you do any other kind of work towards academic progress, be it the dean's list or whatever, graduation audit, whatever you did? That is more specific. In the olden days, it was really a cowboy's paradise. You could put whatever you thought met the definition of follow-up, which is why we didn't use it a whole lot, because we didn't know what it meant. We didn't know what you meant. There's nothing in there that let us have an idea. This gives us a little bit of an idea about what kinds of things could be in there. So this is a cleaner data element. It will make it a little bit easier for you to report on. Again, if it happened that term. If it didn't happen that term, don't want any information about it. She'll be right there. I think they're writing down another question. Two hands. I think there's one for halfway and one that I think you can reach. There we go.
Myrna, in the first incarnation of the data elements, this is recorded up to 4 times in the term. And I noticed in the new incarnation that's on the web, it just says reported each term.
Well, what you can do is you can have every one of those services that term. So in truth, you could have supplied all those services that term for that student. So you could put a tick mark. It's one data element, but it allows you to pick the services that you provided.
So either if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're still getting 1.5%.
Yes.
Myrna, this seems to contradict another statement you made earlier about recording a service for that term in the initial assessment or the initial orientation field. So now do we have to determine if it was initial or if it was a follow-up?
You would have to, you'd have to figure it out.
All right, so you're putting the onus on the college.
Well, yeah, we are, because I think what came out during the work group, and Deborah could probably speak to that too, is a lot of people said they actually had multiple orientation services, particularly if a student happened to be in particular programs where they might have the first one, they may have another one after several terms. If you're in like maybe a nursing program or something that has a long-term thing where they pull the students in again and do another kind of, it's an orientation, but it's different from the, here's the college, there's the cafeteria, here's parking lot, there's, whatever it is you need to find. This one goes a little bit deeper and says, now you're in a thing, let's do a little bit more orientation about the thing that you're in, the program you're in. 10 minutes. That's the gist of what I want to say today, because my intent here was not to read the data elements to you because you can read. The intent was to kind of push out the things that I see in the data elements that are significantly different from before, and to emphasize as strongly as I can the importance of looking at these early and trying to submit early if you can. How many of you are not on DataTel, PeopleSoft, or Banner? Are not on them. That means you're a homegrown entity that creates the thing at your own college, right? I think some of you have already started some of your work as far as writing the code to make the thing happen. But I do believe that the 3 biggies, the DataTel, the PeopleSoft, and the Banner, have also begun their trek down the path of trying to get the data elements in place. Some of them may not have it available for fall of 13, but they may have it for spring of 14. whatever you do, attempt to make at least a spring submission. Because one of the things I'd like to do is try to do an allocation look. If you guys put in some data that I can sort of do a pretend allocation, won't be $40 million. Or even 60 or maybe 100, no. But at least I can get some idea of what it looks like, and as we're writing the code for the allocation formula itself, we can get some real-life data to use instead of making up our own test data. It'll give us an opportunity to check the allocation formula for bugs and holes, etc. If we can use real information that comes from you. It also gives you a chance to become intimately familiar with the IT department at the Chancellor's office.
Absolutely. Okay, do we have one more question?
I do appreciate your attention. It's a little warm and it's 4:50.
Can we give our presenter a big round of applause?
Oh, don't do that.
Yes.
This is my job.
Yeah, but we appreciate you coming out and answering questions. She's available for individual questions.
Yeah, you can come on up. I'm going to shut off being in front of this guy, though.
Also, I want to encourage you to visit. We have a vendor reception, a vendor sponsor reception to please patronize our vendors and take advantage of the reception.